Hello and welcome to BBRC Britain and English. Well, thanks for joining me here today. Well, as you can see, I've got the national flag here, the Union Jack, or sometimes known as the Union flag. Well, it's been a very important week this week with VE Day celebrations going on for most of the week in different places. Now, VE Day was exceptionally important, marking the end of World War II. And the official date for celebration was the 8th of May 1945. We're celebrating the 80th anniversary, and since last Monday, Bank Holiday Monday, we've had various celebrations. There was a parade down the Mall and various celebrations with the royal family, where the public were invited to join in with a procession through London, and then a fly past which involved the Red Arrows and various other RAF planes from. Certainly some went back to the wartime, such as the Lanchester, but I don't think they had a Spitfire this time round. But anyway, it's a very important event, and we must mark it and remember those who died. Most of us have got some family who fought in the war, one of the armed forces, such as the Army, the Navy, or the RAF, the Air Force, or we've got connections ourselves. Certainly our parents, grandparents might have fought in the war, and certainly we know a lot of people suffered all those years, 6 years of total mayhem, loss of life. Sadly, some people went away and never came back, and lost their homes as well. All that destruction with the war, which was started by the Germans and Adolf Hitler. Well, here's a few quotes from the Imperial War Museum in London, and this is some important documentation here. 8th of May 1945. Now, if I may, I'd like to quote from the Imperial War Museum in London and a few other extracts from the internet, the all-important internet in this day and age. And this is a few facts from the Imperial War Museum, and I quote: 8th of May 1945. VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, was one that remained in the memory of all those who witnessed it. It meant an end to nearly 6 years of a war that cost the lives of millions, had destroyed homes, families and cities, and had brought a huge suffering and privations to the populations of entire countries. And of course, London was heavily bombed, lots of cities were heavily bombed. And my grandmother was always quick to point out to me and family that more civilians died in the war than servicemen. Millions of people rejoiced in the news that Germany had surrendered, relieved that the intense strain of total war was finally over. In towns and cities across the world, people marked the victory with street parties, dancing and singing. And we've seen a few people, very few are alive of course now, but a few people that have been out and about talking about what they did, dancing in the street, having a total hullabaloo and party and dancing the night away. And they didn't care what people thought in the English way, they just got on with it, and they'd been through the war and they wanted to just have a bit of pleasure and fun, and quite rightly so. But it was not the end of the conflict, nor was it the end to the impact on people. The war against Japan did not end until August 1945, and that was in the Pacific. So of course that's another date we'll mark and should be remembered as well. Of course, went on until August in Japan. The political, social and economic repercussions of the Second World War were felt long after Germany and Japan surrendered. There we are. Germany signed an unconditional offer. Major events here. And not a lot of people talk about this, but Adolf Hitler actually committed suicide on the 30th of April 1945. Probably not a name talked about because of all the desecration and carnage over the years, and sadly most people know that the actual damage went on years and years, and took years to rebuild in this country. Some places in this country have never recovered certainly some cities, they lost everything. So many people were killed. There was rubble all over the place. And it went right through the 50s and 60s trying to rebuild cities. And of course, and it wasn't built to any particular standard that it was before. The lovely old buildings were all lost. It was all concrete by the 60s. And of course, that was all quite cheap. So therefore, compared to the lovely buildings, the lovely streets, that was what took its place. And of course, the people were never to return as well in many cases. So it was a really big impact on communities. And actually rationing, well, that was people were rationing what they could have, whether bits of meat, whatever else. That went on till 1954. So this went on well after the war. But of course there was a baby boom in 1946 to 51, when people decided to have children when they knew there was more settlement and security, obviously, that the war was over. And to most people now, it's not really talked about, but the young people need to know a lot more about it. We do celebrate and commemorate other events, perhaps not national events, perhaps more contentious events that people don't really want to hear about, that are mentioned in the shops. And certainly I know a lady the other day, she was in town here. She wanted to know why there was no bunting in John Lewis. She wanted to know why there wasn't a lot more hullabaloo and celebration and bunting flags and whatever else. As you know, we're not really that good at putting up our national flag. Even an England football match flag is probably sometimes seen as contentious. So, in case you offend somebody, now that doesn't happen in France, Germany, Spain or any other country. And I was only watching the World Snooker tournament the other day, and the first thing that happened when the Chinese Zhang won the World Championship Snooker tournament, his flag was draped around him by a Chinese lady who came down straight away. So there we are. We need to value our flag a lot more and our country. And I'm sure most people will say that's the reason they come here, to see they value our country and culture and acceptance. But we, not to the detriment of showing off perhaps sometimes our values, and perhaps a bit of national pride, which sometimes is well worth having and holding and remembering, because certainly it's dwindling now these days, sadly, and we seem to be too worried about offending certain groups of people, which is not right. And certainly there's other events on in towns and cities now. We're getting a lot of protests about different things abroad, people campaigning about various things abroad. But of course, are they thinking about national events? Are they thinking about people here? So there's a lot of debates to be had. Some people talk about woke agendas, which perhaps Donald Trump is trying to stop, which has all come from America, actually, perhaps in the last, 15, 20 years. But people like Donald Trump, whatever you think of him as a politician, he's trying to end that. And perhaps we need more backbone here, which has been mentioned by a lot of commentators and newspapers. Well, as I alluded to, the war did continue in the Pacific. V-Day marked the end of the war in Europe. The conflict continued in the Pacific, eventually ending with Japanese surrender in August 1945. Well, I think the Americans stopped it by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Total destruction over there, and they surrendered. And to this day, some people really wouldn't buy a Japanese car. Of course, the Japanese sort of tried to create some sort of peace, although they weren't making a lot of money out of it, by building factories in various countries. And of course they built Nissan in Sunderland, to name one factory. We've got other electronics companies here from Japan, and of course that means you're paying local people as well. So therefore it's a lot less contentious. But of course the Germans have taken a lot of big markets to our detriment, which is very sad. And we lost a lot of industry since the war anyway. Shipbuilding being one, motor cars, commercial vehicle manufacturing. There's an awful lot of manufacturing we've lost since the war, which is horrendous really. We don't seem to make anything like we used to. And a lot of people don't realise we did used to make a lot of things here. And we may well need to make a lot more things to continue in the world, because there is talk, and I know it's been mentioned even in the last few days on Radio 4, on the BBC, not that you always take what they say is gospel truth, could be said to be going a bit woke in some ways, but they think there could be another war in the next 5 to 10 years. They were saying that polls suggest that people think there could be another war, especially all this with Russia and Ukraine. And then China is perhaps getting far too powerful. So therefore we need to work together, and peace is the answer. And we really need to think about where we position ourselves in the world as well. Well, the aftermath and rebuilding, there was certainly the start of a new era in 1945, but millions of people have been lost, cities and homes were destroyed, requiring significant construction efforts and reconstruction. Therefore, it was going to cost an awful lot of money, as I alluded to. And of course, this took years and years and years. Coventry, of course, was totally bombed. The cathedral was never the same again, and they had to build a new cathedral. Plymouth in the West Country, totally bombed. Absolutely the worst in the country, apparently, because of the dockyard down there. And they hit various other towns around the area, the coast down there as well. So therefore, you know, that's just two examples of people desecrated. And even in London, I go to London, there was people killed that tried to shelter in a bakery there, downstairs in a basement. And there was a direct hit by a bomb. I think it was 1940 or 41. In the Blitz there, very heavily bombed South London, and they were all killed, all 54 people. And there's a plaque up there, which is how I remember that case. Very, very sad. Well, the royal family's involvement was highly important. Of course, Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II. She was younger then, and certainly she was nevertheless a great person for duty. The British royal family appeared on the balcony, and I again quote, of Buckingham Palace to greet the crowds, and Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret even celebrated with the public in secret. There we are. And Winston Churchill made a speech. That great war leader there. Well, there's various facts and figures on the internet. Do have a look. Certainly talk about the surrender, the end of Nazi Germany, and liberation of Western Europe. Now there's stacks of information online, mercifully, to look at, and of course young people, perhaps who don't know about it, would like to, no doubt would like to perhaps see what their perhaps grandparents went through, or the great grandparents, and we do try to remember all those people who lost their lives and those who suffered, because it did affect families, and it certainly affected the future for a lot of people. And I know I had family fought in the war, and they had friends who died at the hands of the Japanese and the prisoners of war camps. Certainly, of course, you see some of the old war films with what happened. It might have been worse than some of what was portrayed as well. Certainly Colditz and The Great Escape, where they were all shot. Well, thanks very, very much for joining me here today. There's a bit of an insight into the meaning of VE Day and the Second World War, and of course, the start of it, which I actually went to Romerswood Beacon. There was also beacons lit, by the way, here and in the wider area, in the wider country. And there were some street parties, but perhaps not so many as perhaps should have been. But Romerswood Beacon was lit for D-Day, another significant event. Operation Overlord, read all about that, which was marked the start of perhaps the Allies winning against this tyranny. And there's more information about leading up to VE Day. But D-Day, I went to see the beacon lighting all the way up to Robinswood. Exerted myself quite a lot to get up there in Gloucester. Like I say, there's a lot of things been on in London and various other places. Of course, the big thing, which has been mentioned by virtually every commentator and everybody about this, is might be the very last time that there'll be any real commemoration, because obviously most of the people in the war died over the years. And here we are 80 years later. Because most of them have died. There's very few left now. Of course, but this was said 30 years ago. My dad told me this in 1995. There won't be very many left. Of course, a lot have died since. Anyway, do have a look at the Imperial War Museum and various other resources online, because there is a repository of information there actually, and of course some dedicated information from various commentators and perhaps those that were there. Mercifully, they've probably been put there over the years, but of course very significant being 80 years. Thanks very much for joining me here today, and do remember those who suffered during the war. Thank you very much for joining me here today. God bless you.